Some stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with a whisper. Something small, unsettling, and easy to miss unless you're paying attention. The People Under the Stairs grew out of one such whisper, a fleeting headline about a wealthy Los Angeles home hiding an unthinkable secret behind its polished facade. Wes Craven saw that headline, paused, and sensed a darker truth lurking underneath, the kind of truth that doesn't sit quietly. The kind that claws its way into your imagination and refuses to leave. Instead of recreating the real event, Craven reshaped it into a claustrophobic fable about power, cruelty, and the things privileged people bury, sometimes literally to protect their own illusion of order. The house in the film isn't just a cruel maze, it's a reflection of the America Craven saw in the late 80s and early 90s. A place where wealth consolidated neighborhoods were stripped apart, and those who suffered were hidden out of sight. It's no coincidence the walls feel too narrow, the shadows too heavy, or the silence too loud. Every corner of that house was built to echo something broken. But the real fascination isn't just the film's social pulse. It lies in the strange, unsettling events that shaped its creation. Props with strange histories, performances pushed to the edge, scenes altered or erased, and an atmosphere on set that felt more like a haunting than a production. Craven didn't simply direct a movie. He exhumed a nightmare and asked audiences to look directly at it. What followed was a film that confused critics, polarized audiences, and quietly grew into one of the most peculiar cult classics of its era. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The People Under the Stairs, 1991. Fact 1. The origins of the film trace back to a real incident so brief and so quietly reported that most Angelenos never knew it happened. Police once entered a luxurious home in an upscale neighborhood, expecting a routine welfare check, only to find 2 children locked away in darkness, hidden like shameful secrets. That tiny news clipping caught Wes Craven's attention not because of its sensationalism, but because of its silence. He sensed that beneath the polite wording of the article lay something deeply wrong, the kind of wrong that thrives when no one asks questions. Rather than replicate the case, Craven allowed the idea to mutate into a cautionary parable about the rot behind respectability. His early concept centered on a house that didn't just trap bodies, it swallowed innocence, history, and morality piece by piece. The villains weren't fantastical creatures. They were reflections of a society that punishes the vulnerable while protecting the comfortable. Even the layout of the home symbolized a world in which cruelty is compartmentalized and hidden behind locked doors. In the earliest drafts, the film was far bleaker, offering no relief, no laughter, and no clean moral victory. But as the script evolved, Craven sharpened the metaphor rather than softening it. He built a nightmare that felt uncomfortably plausible. The strangest part, the real story that sparked it, was forgotten almost instantly, except by the man who turned it into something unforgettable. Fact 2. Before the film settled into its final blend of horror and grotesque satire, Craven conceived it as a relentless psychological descent. His initial screenplay contained no playful edges, no moments of absurd humor, and no tonal relief. It was a stark portrait of oppression, built to unsettle rather than entertain. When the studio read it, they panicked. They feared the film would be too confrontational, too politically pointed, too raw for audiences seeking escapism. But Craven didn't abandon the core message. Instead, he restructured it, embedding humor like shards of broken glass, sharp, unexpected, and never enough to dull the pain. The bizarre exaggerations of mommy and daddy, the chaotic energy of the house, and the surreal moments of dark comedy weren't meant to lighten the film. They were meant to make it more dangerous. Satire allowed Craven to say what he wanted without being censored outright, slipping truths through the cracks of absurdity. Underneath the eccentric performances and theatrical violence, the original intent remained untouched, a fierce critique of systems that consume the powerless. Craven disguised razor blades inside carnival colors, trusting viewers to feel the cut, even if they couldn't see it. Ironically, the version the studio deemed safer became one of the boldest statements of Craven's career, Fact 3. Casting the film's central villains required more than skill. It required actors capable of inhabiting a very specific kind of menace. Craven wanted Mommy and Daddy to feel like the distorted reflection of a perfect suburban couple smiling on the outside, while something monstrous simmered beneath their skin. Everett McGill entered the room with a quiet, eerie authority, delivering lines with a calmness that felt almost predatory. His stillness unsettled the casting team more than any exaggerated audition ever could. Wendy Roby arrived soon after, carrying a controlled intensity that bordered on ritualistic. Her movements were precise, her voice unnervingly sweet, her expressions too perfect to be comforting. When paired together, the two actors didn't simply perform. They created a warped domestic rhythm, a partnership built on paranoia and repression. Their chemistry was so potent that Craven reshaped several scenes to highlight the grotesque harmony between them. The pair rehearsed privately, developing silent cues, mirrored gestures, and small synchronized tics that suggested a shared delusion, shaping their every decision. Audiences felt that something was off, but few understood how meticulously that feeling was engineered. The brilliance of their performance lies in one truth: they were terrifying not because they were explosive, but because they were controlled. Fact 4. Brandon Adams was chosen for the role of Fool, not simply because he was talented, but because he carried a kind of natural resilience that Craven believed the entire film needed. During the audition, most child actors delivered fear as panic. Adams delivered it as strategy, calculating, observant, quietly brave. It was the first sign that he understood Fool not as a passive survivor, but as a kid forced to grow sharper in order to stay alive. But working with a young actor meant the crew had to protect him from the full psychological weight of the film. Many of the more disturbing images were hidden from him, shown only in fragments or with stand-ins. Several scenes involving the basement children were filmed using clever blocking, so Adams wouldn't fully see the makeup effects. Even the loudest confrontations with Mommy and Daddy were shot in split takes to preserve emotional safety. Yet Adams surprised the crew. When he finally walked the set in near complete darkness for one of the crawl space sequences, he moved with a steadiness that startled even the adults around him. Off camera, he became a source of unexpected stability, frequently easing the nerves of actors who found the house claustrophobic. In a film defined by powerlessness, the youngest character became its grounding force. Fact 5. Roach, the elusive boy hiding behind the walls, is one of the film's most haunting creations, equal parts tragic and triumphant. Finding the right actor to embody that emotional contradiction proved difficult. Dozens auditioned, but most leaned too far toward feral aggression or wounded silence. Sean Whalen was different. He approached Roach not as a broken child, but as someone who had carved out a strange form of freedom within the house's suffocating architecture. In his audition, Whalen unleashed a breathless sequence of gestures, half laugh, half gasp, entirely nonverbal, that instantly caught Craven's attention. It wasn't mimicry, it was instinct. From that moment, Roach evolved from a background victim into a central symbol of rebellion. Someone who used the same walls meant to trap him as a weapon against his captors. Filming his scenes was physically brutal. Whalen spent hours crawling through hand-built channels barely wider than his shoulders. The heat inside the tunnels was suffocating, and dust clouded every movement. On one occasion, he scraped his arm so severely on exposed wood that shooting paused to prevent infection. But Whalen insisted on doing nearly all of his own stunts, believing Roach's struggle needed to feel authentic. His commitment infused the character with a rare electricity, feral joy mixed with defiant pain. Ironically, the character who never speaks conveys some of the film's loudest truths. Fact 6. The basement children, with their sunken eyes and hollowed bodies, remain one of the most unsettling images from the film. But their creation was rooted in stark realism rather than fantasy. Craven instructed the makeup department to avoid theatrical monsters and instead study how isolation, trauma, and sensory deprivation reshape the human body. The goal was not to horrify through exaggeration, but to disturb through recognition. Each actor underwent extensive makeup work designed to subtly distort proportions without losing all traces of childhood. Uneven skin tone suggested years of malnutrition. Hair was carefully tangled, as though never fully cut or combed. Their movements were choreographed to mimic the quiet shared mimicry often seen in children who survive long-term confinement together. Nothing about them was random. What made filming difficult wasn't the makeup, it was the environment. The basement set was intentionally built with low ventilation and dim, uneven lighting to evoke suffocating confinement. After long hours, even adult extras reported dizziness and disorientation. Crew members occasionally mistook actors resting in shadows for props because their stillness was so eerie. Craven kept the discomfort subtle but present, believing the camera would sense what words couldn't express. These weren't monsters, but children shaped by cruelty. The result was a portrayal so disturbingly grounded that audiences often misremember the basement children as more grotesque than they actually are, proof that implication can wound deeper than spectacle. Fact 7. The house used for filming became a character in its own right, an unpredictable presence that unsettled even the most seasoned crew members. Although the interior was a constructed set, the atmosphere inside it never felt artificial. The wood absorbed sound, strangely swallowing footsteps, while amplifying small noises in ways no one could explain. More than once, crew working alone in a corridor reported hearing faint dragging sounds from behind the walls, even when no actors were present. Technicians searched for loose cables, shifting panels, or air pockets that might explain the noises, but the structure was solid. Sean Whalen admitted that he avoided lingering in the set's darker corners, claiming the stillness felt too attentive, as though the house were listening rather than waiting. A grip recalled placing a light stand down, only to turn back moments later and find it leaning at a slightly different angle, subtle enough to doubt his own memory. Craven never discouraged these whispers. Instead, he allowed them to circulate, believing discomfort sharpened performances. The unease wasn't staged. It seeped naturally from the set into the actors' bodies. The strangeness never escalated into danger, but it created a low, constant tension that hung in the air throughout production. It's fitting, then, that a film about a predatory home was made inside a home that seemed to have its own intentions. Fact 8. One of the film's most intense sections. The pursuit through the narrow ducts was far more complicated to shoot than the final cut suggests. The crawl spaces were constructed as interlocking tunnels, built to twist in ways that disoriented both actors and camera operators. Brandon Adams, despite his confidence, quickly discovered the physical strain of maneuvering through such tight spaces. Heat gathered between the boards, and dust fell into every corner. Midway through filming the chase sequence, he began coughing uncontrollably, forcing an unexpected halt. To avoid risking the young actor's safety, Craven reimagined the entire sequence overnight. Instead of continuous shots, he broke the chase into smaller, highly controlled segments, hands gripping walls, brief silhouettes, fragmented glimpses of motion. This approach made the scene more visually frantic, while keeping Adams out of the most claustrophobic sections. However, the challenges didn't end. The shotgun blasts meant to strike the walls caused vibrations that rattled the maze. In one take, a panel buckled inward, unexpectedly rattling the crew. No one was harmed, but the scare changed the set's energy. For the remainder of production, stunt doubles handled the riskiest parts, while Adams delivered close-ups in safer conditions. The editing stitched everything together so seamlessly that audiences assumed the chase was one fluid sequence. The truth is far more fragile and far more dangerous than what the camera reveals. Fact 9. Daddy's appearance in the leather suit is one of the film's most notorious images, yet the process of wearing and filming in it was an ordeal for Everett McGill. The suit wasn't designed with comfort in mind. Its rigid seams and thick material trapped heat, turning every movement into a physical battle. During fittings, McGill quickly overheated, forcing the costume team to improvise modifications, hidden vents, breathable lining, and frequent cooling breaks with industrial fans. Even with these adjustments, he could tolerate the suit only in short bursts. But the discomfort had an unexpected artistic benefit. The restrictive suit forced McGill to move with stiff, angular motions that made Daddy seem less human and more like a malfunctioning machine. Craven recognized the power of this subtle transformation and encouraged McGill to amplify the awkwardness, letting the suit dictate the character's unraveling mental state. The result was a performance that oscillated between theatrical absurdity and genuine menace. Psychologically, the suit also changed McGill's approach. He described feeling sealed off from the rest of the cast, as if the character's isolation were bleeding into his own body. Crew members noticed he became quieter on days they filmed with the suit conserving energy and intensity for the scenes. Strangely enough, the moment Daddy appears most powerful is when the actor inside the costume felt the most vulnerable. Fact 10. The house and the people under the stairs wasn't just a set, it was a visual argument. Craven and his production designers approached its architecture with the mindset of storytellers crafting each level to represent a different psychological terrain. The upper floors shimmer with artificial order, polished surfaces, decorative clutter, and a suffocating sense of perfection. Beneath that veneer is the main level where the rules of the house are enforced through silence and surveillance. And deep below in the basement lies a realm built to erase identity entirely. Craven insisted that the transitions between these levels feel progressively claustrophobic. Ceiling heights subtly shift, hallways narrow, and the lighting grows harsher or dimmer depending on the emotional state he wanted to evoke. Even the wallpapers were chosen for their unsettling patterns, almost familiar but distorted just enough to suggest something is wrong. An unusual detail came from Craven's refusal to soundproof the set completely, by allowing the natural creaks and groans of the structure to bleed through. He created an auditory unpredictability that unnerved actors during scenes of quiet tension. A door frame might pop softly during a dramatic pause. A floorboard might settle at the exact moment a character hesitates. None of it was planned, but Craven welcomed it. The house isn't merely where the story happens. It is the story's conscience constantly reminding the viewer that cruelty is rarely hidden where we expect it. Fact 11. One of the most emotionally charged scenes originally filmed for the movie involved a longer, unbroken moment between Fool and the basement children, one that humanized them far beyond what appears in the final cut. In Craven's original version, the camera lingered on their faces in silence, allowing the audience to absorb the quiet tragedy of children robbed of language, sunlight, and safety. During test screenings, this scene triggered an unexpectedly intense reaction. Some viewers looked away, others cried. The discomfort wasn't fear, it was recognition. Universal executives believed the moment crossed an unspoken boundary, bringing the film too close to real-life cases of captivity and child neglect. Fearing backlash or accusations of exploitation, they insisted the sequence be trimmed significantly. Craven resisted, arguing that the film's power depended on acknowledging the children's humanity, rather than relegating them to monstrous imagery. But he eventually conceded to studio pressure. What remains in the final cut is only a shadow of that original moment. Yet even in its shortened form, the scene still carries a haunting energy, one that hints at the full emotional weight that could have been. Sometimes what we don't see leaves the deepest impression. Fact 12. Throughout the film, reflective surfaces appear in odd, almost intrusive places. Mirrors that distort faces, glass panes set at unnatural angles, metallic objects that catch light but obscure detail. These weren't accidental choices. Craven used reflections to imply fractured identities, buried guilt, and a household obsessed with appearances, but terrified of self-examination. Mommy's repeated glances into mirrors weren't vanity. They were rituals of denial, attempts to maintain control, while her world eroded around her. The mirrors weren't pristine either. Many were intentionally scratched, warped, or covered in dust to disrupt the clarity of the image. When characters walked past them, their reflections seemed stretched or diminished, giving the illusion that the house itself was reshaping their forms. Craven even placed a few mirrors at illogical heights, too low for an adult, too high for a child, as a way to disorient both the actors and the audience. One rarely noticed detail sits near the basement entrance, a small, almost invisible mirror that reflects nothing but a thin strip of darkness. It was positioned deliberately to capture a sense of avoidance, as if no one, including the camera, wanted to confront what lay below. In a film filled with horrors, the mirrors whisper a quieter truth. The monsters aren't hiding in the basement, they're hiding behind the masks people create for themselves. Fact 13. Filming in a real neighborhood brought a layer of unpredictability that the production never fully controlled. The house's exterior transformed into a decaying fortress with barred windows and rotting boards, created an uneasy contrast with the quiet residential street around it. Neighbors who passed by during the early weeks of shooting assumed the worst. Some thought a crime scene was being investigated. Others believed the property had been condemned. One resident even reported the set to the local council, worried it was attracting the wrong kind of attention. But the most memorable misunderstanding happened when a postal worker approached the front porch and glimpsed the basement children in full makeup resting between takes. Shocked, he fled without delivering the mail and returned hours later with a supervisor, convinced something was terribly wrong inside the house. The crew had to escort both visitors through the set to prove everything was staged. Craven later joked that the film had managed to frighten people before a single frame was shot. As filming continued, the neighborhood's attitude shifted. What began as suspicion slowly transformed into fascination. Residents started lingering behind barricades, curious to see what new horrors the crew would unveil each day. Children on bicycles gathered like spectators at a carnival. In an odd way, the house became a temporary landmark, an unsettling reminder that fiction and reality sometimes collide in unexpected ways. Fact 14. Studio involvement in The People Under the Stairs was far more turbulent than audiences might imagine. Universal expected a straightforward horror film, something edgy but commercially safe. What they got instead was a volatile blend of satire, social commentary, and unfiltered anger wrapped in a chaotic fairy tale. Executives grew uneasy as dailies revealed Mommy and Daddy as exaggerated caricatures of wealth and authority, disturbing in ways that mirrored real-world power structures a little too closely. Their concerns escalated when early assemblies of the film showcased scenes that leaned heavily into commentary about gentrification, economic exploitation, and the predatory tendencies of the privileged. Notes from the studio encouraged Craven to neutralize the tone and soften the subtext, but he refused to dilute the film's message. He believed the horror genre was strongest when it reflected society's fractures rather than avoiding them. After a tense week of negotiations, Universal eased its pressure, recognizing that the film's boldness was part of its identity. Only minor trims were required, lines they felt leaned too sharply toward political accusation. Craven accepted these small concessions, but made sure the core themes remained untouched. Decades later, those very themes are the reason the film feels more relevant now than when it premiered. Fact 15. Among the many props used during filming, one knife carried a history no one expected. Initially selected by the prop department for its worn handle and realistic weight, the knife seemed perfect for close-up shots. It wasn't until a continuity assistant cross-referenced its serial markings that the truth surfaced. The blade had once been logged as evidence in an old burglary case in Los Angeles. The case had closed years earlier, and the knife was sold at auction, along with other decommissioned items. No one realized its past until it was already on set. Instead of discarding it, Craven kept the knife in rotation, fascinated by the idea that an object tied to real violence could find new life inside a fictional narrative. Actors who handled it often commented on its heaviness, not physical, but psychological. Some refused to use it for rehearsals, opting for replicas until cameras rolled. A rubber version was created for action shots, but the real knife appears in most of the film's detailed close-ups. Craven believed that authenticity mattered, even when its source was unsettling. He liked the quiet truth embedded in the blade, the idea that even mundane objects can carry shadows. It is fitting that a film about buried cruelty unknowingly incorporated a relic from an actual crime. Fact 16. Over the years, The People Under the Stairs became a quiet blueprint for a new generation of filmmakers looking to merge social critique with genre storytelling. Though not initially celebrated by mainstream critics, its ideas seeped into the creative vocabulary of directors who recognized its courage. Many cited the way Craven weaponized space-turning walls, vents, and staircases into instruments of tension rather than mere backdrops. This architectural terror later appeared in films and series that embraced confined spaces as psychological battlegrounds. Indirect influences are everywhere. Independent horror filmmakers borrowed its off-kilter humor, its exaggerated villains, and its willingness to confront uncomfortable truths wrapped in absurdity. Even creators working outside cinema, graphic novelists, musicians, performance artists, tapped into the film's rebellious energy, channeling its imagery into album artwork, stage productions, and visual motifs. What makes its influence unique is how it operates under the surface. Few projects openly reference the film, but many echo its DNA. The defiance, the disorientation, the refusal to offer neat answers. Craven didn't just build a horror story. He built a framework for storytelling that treated terror as both entertainment and critique. And the film's staying power proves one thing: sometimes the stories dismissed in their own time become the foundation for stories told decades later. Fact 17. When re-examined in the context of modern society, the film's themes feel unsettlingly familiar. The exaggerated cruelty of mommy and daddy no longer reads as theatrical. It reads as commentary on power structures that continue to shape real neighborhoods. The boarded windows, locked doors, and hidden captives can be seen as metaphors for communities displaced or silenced by larger forces. Over time, analysts and professors began screening the film not as a simple horror piece, but as a text loaded with unresolved questions about class and exploitation. Students studying housing inequality recognized the patterns immediately. The wealthy hoarding space, the poor losing ground, and the extremes people reach to preserve control. Craven's villains embody an obsessive need to possess property, bodies, and narratives. Fool, by contrast, represents those pushed into corners until resilience becomes their only weapon. The film's chaotic tone, once criticized, is now seen as an honest reflection of a system that feels incoherent and threatening. What's remarkable is that the film didn't age into relevance. It was already speaking truths many were unwilling to hear. Modern audiences don't watch it as a relic. They watch it as a mirror. Craven may not have intended prophecy, but he captured a fracture that only widened with time. Fact 18. Though overshadowed by Craven's blockbuster titles, this film slowly built a devoted cult following that thrives on its contradictions. Fans love that it refuses to be neatly categorized. Too funny to be purely grim, too grotesque to be traditional satire, too political to be dismissed as camp. It's this refusal to choose a single identity that draws people back year after year. Each rewatch reveals new layers, lines that read differently, symbols that sharpen moments that resonate. Online discussions treat the film like a puzzle with no single correct interpretation. Some believe it's a modern fairy tale about lost children reclaiming their voice. Others argue it's a metaphor for institutional violence, disguised as domestic order. Conventions often host midnight screenings that transform into communal rituals, audiences shouting lines, laughing at absurdity, then falling silent when the deeper implications hit. Its filming locations have even become unofficial pilgrimage spots. Visitors leave tokens, flashlights, toy coins, handwritten notes paying tribute to Fool's defiance and Roach's resilience. Homeowners are often startled by the devotion, but admit the enthusiasm is strangely touching. There's an irony in the film's cult status. A story about people trapped beneath a house ended up inspiring people to revisit that house as if drawn by something unresolved. Fact 19. During the climactic moment when the basement children finally surge upward in a chaotic wave of movement, something happened on set that no one planned. The choreography called for the actors to press forward in a controlled slow-motion advance, enough to look overwhelming without endangering anyone. But a misinterpreted cue disrupted the timing. Instead of coordinated movement, the group surged all at once, collapsing the careful formation and swallowing Brandon Adams in a blur of pale limbs and frantic motion. For a few seconds, no one realized anything was wrong. The cameras kept rolling, and the noise of the scene masked Adams' initial struggle. When he finally emerged breathless and shaken, the set froze. Crew rushed in, the cast apologized, and shooting halted to make sure he wasn't injured. Adams insisted he was fine, though his hands trembled slightly. What struck the crew was how quickly he regained composure, slipping back into character with remarkable focus. Later, when Craven reviewed the footage, he noticed something extraordinary. The unintended collapse had produced an authenticity impossible to replicate. Fear, confusion, resistance. All the emotional currents of Fool's Ark were captured in Adams' expression during those unscripted moments. Even though Craven didn't use that exact take, he restructured the final sequence to echo its raw, unfiltered energy. It is one of those rare moments where the chaos of filmmaking accidentally revealed the truth of the story more clearly than the planned choreography ever could. Fact 20. The destruction of the house in the final sequence was conceived as the symbolic collapse of everything the villains tried to build, control hierarchy illusion. But orchestrating that destruction was a technical and emotional marathon. Instead of relying on digital effects, the team constructed an intricately detailed miniature model that captured the house's unsettling personality, warped beams, chipped paint, and even tiny replicas of its unnerving decor. Every crack and imperfection was reproduced with obsessive accuracy. The plan required multiple high-speed cameras to capture the explosion from different angles. The problem was timing. Pyrotechnic charges had to detonate in perfect sequence to give the illusion that the house was imploding rather than simply blowing apart. Minutes before filming, a sharp change in the wind threatened to scatter debris unevenly, risking the entire setup. Crew members scrambled to stabilize equipment, weighing down tripods and adjusting shields. Craven refused to postpone the shot. He believed the tension would imprint itself on the footage, and somehow, he was right. When the charges ignited, the miniature didn't burst outward like a typical movie explosion. Instead, it folded in on itself in a strange, almost sorrowful collapse, as if the house were finally surrendering. The effect stunned everyone on set. Engineers insisted the behavior defied their calculations. But Craven saw meaning in the unexpected. To this day, special effects artists study the shot not for its scale, but for the eerie way the structure seemed to die rather than detonate. Bonus fact: long after production wrapped a peculiar story about one of the set pieces, the small wooden door panel used in the basement corridor circulated quietly among crew members. It wasn't an important prop. It wasn't symbolic. It was simply a piece of distressed lumber meant to blend into the background. But several crew members began noticing that the panel rarely stayed where they had last placed it. A lighting technician swore he left it propped against a central pillar, only to return the next morning and find it leaning near the crawl space. A production assistant insisted she secured it with sandbags, yet somehow it reappeared across the room. They blamed exhaustion, long hours, and miscommunication until the movements took on a pattern. The panel always seemed to drift closer to the hidden passages, as if subtly returning to its proper place. The prop master eventually removed it from the set entirely, storing it in a side room to end the confusion. For a while that worked. Then weeks later, the panel strangely turned up inside a locked equipment cage. No one admitted to moving it. No one could explain how it bypassed a padlock, requiring a key signed out by only 2 people. The incident rattled several crew members who had already felt uneasy inside the house set. When Craven heard the story, he didn't dismiss it. He simply smiled and said, "Some pieces of a story know where they belong." No further explanation, no clarification, just that single cryptic line. The panel disappeared again before the final strike day. It wasn't cataloged, discarded, or misplaced. It was simply gone. And for a film built on secrets behind walls, perhaps that's exactly where it returned. If this story made you see the film through a different lens, tell us which moment unsettled you the most. Sometimes the details hiding beneath a narrative reveal more than the plot ever will. And the discussion afterward becomes its own kind of discovery. Share your thoughts, your theories, or the detail you think carries a deeper meaning than the film admits. And if there's another title you want us to unearth next, leave it in the comments. There's always another truth waiting just below the surface.